Hey everybody, it's James coming on somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 o'clock Eastern Time. I believe it is March the 9th, 2022 on the modern day Gregorian calendar. And why do I bring up the date? Bring up the date because time is important. And to a man of Yahweh such as myself, who is very interested in keeping Yahweh's holy days, Leviticus 23, right off the bat, says these are the feasts of Yahweh, not the Jews, not the Israelites, but of Yahweh. So that's very important to me. And I have to say right off the bat, you're going to pick up on this probably as I go through this. I might as well just address it now. I'm very tired right now, but I know that if I don't talk about this, I won't be able to sleep tonight. That is how heavy my spirit is on this particular topic. And I might as well just go ahead and share what triggered me. A video came out. I follow a YouTube channel called Hanging on His Words. It's a gentleman named Ken Heidebrecht from Canada. Right off the bat, I like Ken. I respect him. I think he's a great teacher. I think he's very intelligent. And I count him as a brother in the faith. He put a video out basically making the case for keeping the Enoch Jubilees calendar. And I watched the video and it just brought to my mind all of the problems that are faced with trying to keep the biblical calendar. To set this up, let me give a brief overview of my experience with Yahweh's calendar. And the lighting is poor right now. I apologize for that. When I first started keeping the Sabbath and the holy days of Yahweh back in 2005, I attended a local congregation and we were doing what is called the Jewish calendar, or more technically, the Hillel 2 calendar. This is the standard calendar that's used throughout Judaism. It's used in the synagogues. It's used by Messianic Jews. It's used by Hebrew roots people. It's used by the vast majority of the people who want to keep Yahweh's holy days in some capacity. Okay? And I did that for a couple years there, and then I moved out to Pennsylvania. When I moved out to Pennsylvania, I became aware of a different calendar that I had no idea existed. This was basically the Karaite calendar. And the Karaites, for those of you who don't know, are a sect of Jews who basically want to be more accurate to what the actual text says. And so the leading proponent, at least here in American circles, of Karaite Judaism is a man named Nehemiah Gordon. And he was brought to my attention through a Hebrew roots teacher named Michael Rood. You might have heard of his show, A Rude Awakening. And my wife and her family kept that calendar. And what it basically is, the modern Jewish calendar, the Hillel 2 calendar, is a lunar solar calendar. The way this works, it starts in the spring because Exodus chapter 12 says, this month will be the beginning of months to you, will be the beginning of year to you. And it calls it the month of Abib, which basically translates as green. So spring, that's the implied idea here. Okay? So it starts in the spring. And basically it goes, a typical year will be 12 lunar months long. These are observed lunar months. Okay? Now, at the time of the Second Temple, now this is prior to the Hillel 2 calendar being fully adopted, we have evidence that the Jews of the Second Temple, and this was all orchestrated and led by the Sanhedrin, okay, this was the leadership of the time, they basically kept a calendar of 12 lunar months. And they cited the first visible crescent after conjunction. Okay, conjunction is when the moon goes dark. Okay, that's a very loose term. It's 2 or 3 day long window, but generally it's dark moon. Okay, visibly from Earth. And when they saw that first sliver of the moon, that is when the month started. Okay, all the months started. And of course, by default, the first month of the year started the same way. You would go 12 months, 12 months, 12 months. Okay. Now, because a lunar year is short of a solar year by approximately 10 days, okay, 12 lunar months are approximately 354 days, it varies, and a solar year is 365 days and change. So you're 10 or 11 days short every year. Well, after about 3 years, the beginning of your year has fallen behind by approximately 30 days. Now you're getting into the winter months when your year starts, and it's supposed to start in the spring. So what do? You have to add a 13th month. It's called an intercalary month. Okay. Now the Karaite calendar that I adopted when I moved to Pennsylvania basically did that. And the way the Karaite calendar works is it goes off of the visible sighting of the moon, specifically from the land of Israel. Okay. And it has the other feature of they want to sight the barley at a specific stage in its growth. The idea being that you offer the wave sheaf offering during the feast of Passover, which is about the middle of the first month. So the barley has to be in such a stage of growth where it can be harvested and eaten. Okay? Either as is from the field, or it can be parched and dried and eaten that way. And then once that is offered at the temple, then the harvest can begin. Okay? Now, the calculated Jewish calendar, the Hillel 2 calendar, basically took that overall idea, except instead of waiting every year for visible signs in the barley crop and the sighted moon, it was pre-calculated because they figured out by then that the moon lines up with the sun. Okay, the solar and lunar cycles line up approximately every 18.6 years. So they round that up to 19 years, and the cycle repeats. They figured that out. And so they instituted a calculated calendar that did not rely on visual observations. This had the utility of taking any subjectivity out of the calendar. And it allowed all the Jews who were in the land and those who were in diaspora to be on the same exact calendar. That's a good thing on paper. Of course, the Karaite Jews would argue that it's a fallacy. It's incorrect. Okay? So those are the two calendars that I did for the longest time. And basically, somewhere along the line, and I'm just giving the evolution of how I came to know about all the different types of biblical calendars. Okay? Your recollection of this may vary depending on your personal experience on when you came across this stuff. So the next thing for me, somewhere several years ago, I don't remember exactly when, there's a ministry called 119 Ministries. They put out a video series called The Creator's Calendar. Basically, with that, they did a few changes to the calendars that I was aware of. Now, I'm sure that other people were following these ideas prior to this video coming out. But in my circles, the best I can tell, this is where the idea was introduced. Okay? The basic changes over the calendars that I discussed were A, they acknowledged the reality that you have to contend with issues such as famine when it comes time to sighting a barley harvest. If you have to know when the barley is ripe to determine when your year starts, what do you do during famine years when there is no barley crop? What do you do in the 40 years in the wilderness when there's no barley crop? Now, the Karaites, Nehemiah Gordon actually speculated this on his website, Karaite Corner, the Israelites would have sent spies into the land of Israel to see when the barley was ripe. Problem is, there's nothing in our Bible that says that. And I'm going to say that phrase quite a bit in this video, much to my frustration and dismay. So their way around this was knowing that the year needs to start in the spring. Most of the world identifies the beginning of spring with the astronomical occurrence of the equinox, the spring equinox or the vernal equinox. This is a moment where no matter where you're at around the world, you will observe the sun rising due east in the morning, perfectly east from wherever you're at in the world. We know from a fact that we have ancient megalithic monuments like Stonehenge, other monuments like Karnak in France, and literally hundreds of megalithic sites all line up to some variation of the fall and spring equinoxes or the winter and summer solstices or all four. Stonehenge being a very famous example, okay, in England. It's not that hard to figure this out. It's not that hard to observe visibly when the sun is due east and due west, therefore when it sets. That's equinox, happens twice a year. And it's not that hard to visualize when the sun reaches the northernmost movement and starts to turn around and come back, and when it hits the southernmost movement and turns around and starts to come back. Those are easy to see, okay? It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon or a politician to figure this out. So the idea that they came up with, and it made sense because we can't use the barley as a reliable witness. So we need to take the subjectivity out of it and make it more objective. Basically, the way they came up with to reconcile that was the first new moon, the first beginning of the month, right? The new moon. We'll get into that in a few moments here, what exactly that means. The first new moon after that equinox, the spring equinox, would be the first month of the year. Okay? So that works itself out automatically because that date is going to move every year. And that the equinox itself will determine when you add that 13th month. You still have to do that. You still have to add a 13th month to this form of a calendar. The other thing that they did is they decided that instead of going off of the first sighting of the crescent moon after conjunction, the waxing crescent moon, that they should go off of conjunction. Conjunction is when the moon is not visible from our position here on the ground. And there's a window observable from Earth of about 2 or 3 days when there's no moon. There is an exact moment that can be calculated on when the exact astronomical conjunction is. Now, that's not observable. It has to be calculated. We know that there were some of the ancients that were able to do this. They had this knowledge. So it can be done. So within my spheres, when I first moved to Pennsylvania, pretty much everybody was keeping the holy days at the same time. We had multiple families getting together for the Feast of Tabernacles and camping, and it was awesome. I loved it. I absolutely adored it, and I miss it. Part of my angst on this topic. Just wearing my heart on my sleeve here, guys. So prior to this, one more thing that I failed to mention. With the sighting of the sliver moon, the Karaite method that I was using when I moved to Pennsylvania, there's 2 variations on that. There's the variation of it can only be sighted from the land of Israel, and there's the variation of local sighting wherever you're at in the world. So basically, what would happen is, when I first moved here, we were going off of the Israel sighting. And the way we would know this was the internet. Big surprise, because I don't live in Israel. How else am I supposed to know? So we would check the internet, and people that lived in Israel would report that they saw that moon. So then we would start our year or our months, however we were doing. Now, after a while, I got to thinking, I'm not the only one, but I got to thinking, what if we lose the internet? What if I lose connection to Israel and I have no idea when they're sighting the sliver of the moon over there? at that point, I'm going to have to look up in the sky and see myself from wherever I'm at. That makes a lot more sense because then I'm not dependent on technology in the timing of when I keep Yahweh's holy days. So I made the decision. My wife agreed. We abandoned the sighting of the moon from Jerusalem and opted to do it from basically anywhere that was observed locally, okay, including ourselves. And so did that for a while, okay, and so for that time, basically everybody in the local area was keeping the feasts at the same time, plus or minus a day, because there were some that were going off the sighting from Jerusalem, there were some that were going off the local sighting. And the way it works is you're probably going to see it from the North America prior to them seeing it in Jerusalem. And so, if you were going off of Jerusalem, you were almost always a day later than everybody else. But even then, we were still in the same general time frame. Okay? We could still fellowship. Now, when we add conjunction into it, so now we have people doing the months at the sighting of the moon from Jerusalem. We have the sighting of the moon locally, and now we have conjunction. So depending on how this works out, it's usually 2 dates because conjunction is sort of close. It can be close to how we sight it locally from this hemisphere, but it can be off too. So now you have a window that can be about 3 days difference. So within our local sphere here, we could have families starting the holy days on 3 different days. And you can see that as this progresses, it gets harder and harder to fellowship together. So we had that. That was the 119 ministries calendar that came out. Then after that, at some point, okay, so I made the decision a few years, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, to go with the idea of let's just wait for the new moon after the equinox. That way we take the barley out of it, because it seems like every year there were multiple people going over to Israel to inspect the barley, and there were multiple conclusions. And so we had one year where I had 2 people that I trusted over observing the barley, and they came back with 2 different reports. And so I had to pick which one of these is right. It throws you off a whole month if you have to wait. It ought not to be so. So I decided to take that out of it, because in your Bible, there's nothing that says to do that. People say there is, but there's nothing that says that. You have to make assumptions. You have to make assumptions about what Abib means, the month of Abib. You have to make assumptions about the wave sheaf offering that aren't in your Bible. It doesn't ever say that the wave sheaf offering has to be during Passover, or not Passover, but the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It never says that. It never says anything about offering parched grain for the wave sheaf offering. It's a wave sheaf offering. The very name sheaf implies that it's not parched grain. Parched grain is usually carried in bowls or some type of other vessel. So there are inconsistencies there. Okay? Let's be real about this. That calendar is not spelled out in the Bible. And neither is new moon being sighted by the sliver. That's never spelled out. It's never spelled out if it's sighted by the sliver in Israel or locally. There's nothing in our Bibles that say that. We assume. There's nothing in our Bibles that say to use conjunction specifically. We have to make assumptions. And I realize that as I go through this, everybody I know that believes in keeping Yahweh's holy days, I have the potential to ruffle that person's feathers. And that's not my intention here. My intention here is to lay this all out logically. Let's think about this. What are we doing? Okay? So I made the decision to go off of the first new moon after the spring equinox and go off for each month, go off the sighted moon locally. Okay. I made that decision a few years ago. Maybe 3, 4, 5, I forget exactly by now how long ago it was. Well, right off the bat, I ran into a problem. The first year I decided to do this, the um the new moon, rather than being like a day or two or maybe a week or whatever after conjunction, was the day before, or not conjunction, equinox was like a day or two before. So that meant that if I was going to go by my own decided way of doing the calendar, we were going to be a whole month later than everybody that year. And we didn't want to keep the feast alone. So I decided to go back on that, at least that year, and keep the feast with everybody else a month earlier than I would have. Okay? Some of you people know that process I went through, and others, you're finding out now. Then at some point, and now we're going to get into the Enoch calendar, the Enoch Jubilees calendar. The Enoch Jubilees calendar is nothing new. We've known about it ever since the Book of Enoch was discovered in Egypt, and that goes back into the 1800s when that was discovered and translated. We've known about Jubilees. I forget when they found Jubilees, a while back. They found copies of this stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran in 1947, I think, 47, 48. And so these are old documents. They are. Dating wise, they go back way before the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is the Hebrew that underscores your Old Testament. Your Old Testament will be based on a Masoretic text that was translated in the medieval times. We don't have any ancient Masoretic manuscripts. We don't have the manuscripts that the Masoretic came from. They just appeared in the medieval times. Prior to that, we have copies of what's called the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was started approximately, give or take, 300 BC. This was for the Jews who lived in Alexandria, Egypt. They wanted a Bible that they could read in their own language because they didn't speak Hebrew. They were born and raised in Egypt, which spoke Greek at that time. The Dead Sea Scrolls fit somewhere kind of in between. They're dating to where they are a little bit newer than the Septuagint and way older than the Masoretic. Okay, so, and when you compare the Septuagint with the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic, the Dead Sea Scrolls match the Masoretic in some cases, and they match the Septuagint in some cases. And assuming that these documents are all related in some way distantly, it implies that there was a document way back that they all kind of came from, but then there were changes made down the road, either on purpose or by scribal error. We don't really know because we don't have those old documents. And that's the problem. We don't have any documentation of any of this written prior to the Septuagint. We don't have anything written during King David's time. We don't have anything written during Moses' time. The actual manuscripts that we have copies of, that we can touch, only go back about 300, 400 maximum BC. That's it. That's it. So with Enoch, let's get into Enoch. Enoch has a calendar. And if you're not familiar with the book of Enoch, it was found in a Coptic church in Egypt sometime in the 1800s. Was translated. Now, this is First Enoch. There are 3 versions of Enoch. The first one is the one that's the oldest, claims to have been written by Enoch, who was the 7th from Adam. And it was quoted several times in the New Testament, verbatim. And so that gives a sense of validity. Second and Third Enoch are magical, mystical books that were written quite a bit later in the post-Christian era. Now, Enoch has a calendar that is 364 days long exactly. And the way this calendar works is it's divided into seasons, basically. So your spring season will have a 30-day month, a 30-day month, and then a 31-day month, basically. The way it describes it technically, it would be like 30, 30, 30 plus 1. 30, 30, 30 plus 1. 30, 30, 30 plus 1. Okay? So basically what you're looking at is 12 months of 30 days, which gives you 360 days, and then one intercalary day, or intercalary day, depending on how you choose to pronounce it, in between each of those groupings. And those days would fall on the transitions of the seasons. So like on the equinoxes and the solstices. And when I first came across this calendar, it had a lot of appeal to me. This was several years ago. And the Book of Jubilees has an identical calendar. It's very appealing because it takes all of the subjectivity out of it, in theory. Because with this calendar, you're just counting. It's beautiful. 364 days is evenly divided by 7, 52 times. 52 Sabbaths every year. That's great. Your holy days end up symmetrically in the same spot every month. It's beautiful. I love it for that regard. The problem is that the Enoch calendar, I'm pretty sure it says it in both Enoch and Jubilees. It says it specifically that it brings in the year 364 days every year, no more, no less. Now, why is this a problem? This is a problem because a actual solar year is 365 days and change, which means that if you go by the straight Enoch calendar, 364 days every year, so like 364 plus 364 plus 364 plus 364, the beginning of your year is going to fall back a day relative to the sun every single year. So the beginning of your year is going to drift back slowly, slowly, slowly. In 7 years, it's going to start 7 days earlier. In 30 years, it's going to start 30 days earlier, a whole month. So this has the same problem as the conventional Jewish calendar. You have to find a way to add that time back in to keep it synced up with the actual solar year. Otherwise, it's going to drift out of the seasons. The Muslims run into this same problem because they keep a straight lunar calendar. They don't use the sun at all. They go 12 lunar months every year. So Ramadan for them drifts back. You notice this after a while in the news if you pay attention because they announce Ramadan on the news. Okay, usually the president will have a big, dinner or something at the White House. It's a month earlier every year because they never add that extra month to keep it timed up with the seasons. It will drift back. In 12 years, it'll be right back to where it started. That's the nature of that. And Enoch will do the same thing in its own way if you don't add time to it. The problem is, just like in our Bibles, our canonized scripture, there is no method in the text to add that time. It says 364 days, no more, no less. Paraphrasing. So if it's no more, no less, in theory, we only have two ways to deal with that. A is you cannot add intercalary days at the end of the year to sync it back up with the sun. Or B, you can, you just don't count those as part of the year. So that way your year is still 364 days long perfectly, but you're still synced up with the sun. Now, to me, that's a cop-out. It's a cop-out. And with the Enoch calendar, we have the same problems we have with the lunar solar Hebrew calendar. This is, when do we start the year? When do we start the months? There are basically two ways that I know of that people calculate when to start the year based on Enoch. Some do on the equinox, The vernal equinox in the spring, that's when the year starts. Now, you have to think outside the scope of our modern Gregorian calendar for this, okay? Because on our Gregorian calendar, the equinox will fall on a different day of the week every year, okay? But we're not talking about the Gregorian calendar here. We're talking about the biblical calendar, okay? So let's say, for example, that this year, this year 2022, I know for a fact that equinox is on March the 20th. I'm not sure what day of the week that is, but hypothetically, let's say it's a Wednesday. Okay, so the Enoch calendar would start and would start on that Wednesday, and it would go 364 days, and which would mean it would end Tuesday the same week the next year. In theory, equinox would start again on March 20th, and you start your cycle over. The problem is that if you look over time on our Gregorian calendars and the day of the week, the way the day of the week is, that day of equinox will drift. It'll be like March 20th, March 21st, March 19th. It varies. Okay? And it will change the day of the week. So what happens with that is it, well, it's not worth getting into the weeds on that. So that's one way to look at it. They started on the equinox, regardless of when it falls every single year, regardless of the day of the week. Okay? The other way to look at it, there is the best I can tell, this is it was started by like a YouTube channel, and then people picked it up and it kind of became its own thing. They call it the Zadok calendar. And the best I can tell, the Zadok calendar is a version of the Enoch calendar. The only difference is that it starts on Wednesday every year. Well, why that, James? Why would it start on Wednesday? Starts on Wednesday because in Genesis chapter 1, let me just read it for you, because this is a big, big thing here. Okay? Genesis chapter 1, we're going to read about the fourth day. We're going to start in verse 14. Then Elohim, or your English translations will say God, said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. Yahweh, or Elohim, made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. And he placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light to the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. So, since it plainly says that these two great lights, the greater light and the lesser light, are for seasons, for days, and for years, plainly says it, this is what we should base our calendar off of. Okay? Now, these didn't come along until the fourth day of the week. So therefore, none of the periods of time that are reckoned by these lights can start prior to that fourth day of the week. So your year, the beginning of your year has to be on a Wednesday, basically is how we would reckon it on our modern time, the fourth day of the week. And that would also be the start of the first month. So every single year this way, it would start on a Wednesday. You go 364 days. The following year, the 364th day would be a Tuesday. Day one would be a Wednesday. And you would repeat this cycle over and over and over again. Okay? Now, we have the problem here of there's no way, like I said, to fix this and line it up with a true solar year, so it will drift. Now, there are some people who take care of that by just go ahead and sneak that 365th day in. Okay, every year. So you end up, they say they're keeping a 364-day calendar, but really they're stretching it out to 365 because they know it won't work. Okay? And you have other people who will just wait 7 years because you lose a day every year. They'll just add a week on. every 7 years, which is nice because that's every 7 years, that's the year of release. In our Bibles, that's a legitimate time frame. Okay? So that's, on paper, yeah, I like that the way that works. But the problem is there's nothing in the Enoch calendar or the Jubilee calendar that says to do that. We run into the same problem that we run into the Hebrew lunar solar calendar. There's not enough information. All of these calendars, no matter who came up with them, no matter who teaches them, no matter how nice of a diagram you can make, none of these calendars that we are using to reckon the feasts of Yahweh have 100% bulletproof textual evidence for their reckoning. Not a single one. Not a single one. I wish the Enoch calendar was true. Like I said earlier, it would make things so much easier. But if there's not a method in the text that tells how to reconcile the 364 days versus the 365 and a quarter that we actually observe, then we're right back at square one. We can't just assume this is the accurate calendar that God gave to Moses, or he gave to Enoch, or he gave to whoever, if it doesn't work. And I think for a lot of people, and I don't want to presume to speak for Ken, and like I said, I have the utmost respect for Ken, so he'll probably never see this, but I just want him to know if he does, this is not meant to be an attack, okay? This is just meant to illustrate the problem. In order to accept the Enoch calendar or to accept the Jubilees calendar, you have to believe that those texts are inspired, right? You have to believe that the texts are true. Otherwise, why bother? Now, with Jubilees, I personally have done my due diligence on it over the years, and I don't think it's inspired. Some people do. I don't. With Enoch, you can't get around that it was quoted multiple times in the New Testament. Big chunks of it were quoted in 2 Peter and Jude. The Messiah himself quoted it. Okay, so you can't get around that. But with the book of Enoch, it's so huge. It's a massive piece of text. Most scholars think that it was written by several different people claiming to be Enoch. Okay? And what do they base that on? They base it on differences in vocabulary between sections, differences in writing style, things of this nature. Okay, that's called textual criticism. And it's a legitimate study. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. Criticism, we get it in our heads, oh, don't criticize me, like it's some kind of bad thing. There's a thing called positive criticism. It comes from the same idea of critical thought, thinking critically. You are analyzing the evidence. Okay, and that can work, positively or negatively. All right, so, I'm open to the idea that the parts of the book of Enoch that were quoted in the New Testament may be inspired. But I'm also open to the idea that the non-quoted sections maybe weren't. Maybe they were added on later and attributed to Enoch, like a pseudepigrapha. And then somebody compiled and editorialized the whole thing at some point and put it all together, said Enoch wrote this. I'm open to that. Now, not being present for it, I can't prove it or disprove it. And I'd be lying if I said I could. But the evidence, is not solid enough for me to say that just because that calendar is in the book of Enoch, I should accept it. That's an assumption I'm not willing to make. So, what are we left with here? If you are not interested in keeping Yahweh's holy days, if you are interested in keeping Easter, Christmas, things like this, then all this conversation is irrelevant to you. And my wife and I talk about this sometimes, I almost envy mainstream Christianity in that regard, because they know every year exactly when their days will be. Christmas is always December 25th. It never varies. Okay? Easter varies. It's always the first Sunday after the first full moon after spring equinox. The Catholic Church invented that. That's not in your Bibles. It's not. Catholic Church invented that. And the Protestants went right along with it. They didn't protest enough. So, I mean, you can look up Polycrates, you can look up Polycarp. These are early church fathers. Polycarp goes to around 150, 160 AD. Okay? He was a disciple of John the Apostle. He kept Passover, not Easter. Easter was a later innovation by the Catholic Church. Well, innovation, I say that word, loosely. So, anyway, but we don't have that luxury. Those of us who want to keep the feast of Yahweh don't have that luxury, because the plain truth is this book doesn't spell it out. It doesn't. For whatever reason, it doesn't spell it out. We don't have it. If we did, we wouldn't have all of these divisions over when to keep the holy days. So let me just count off here what I just mentioned here. How many versions of the calendar do we have for people who are keeping Yahweh's holy days? We've got the Hillel 2 Jewish calendar. We've got the different variations of the Karaite calendar, which is going to be basically, let's see, you've got 3 different variations there. You've got Jerusalem sighting, local sighting, conjunction, and then those are people who are using barley, so there's 4. You've got the variation of that for people who are going after the equinox, there's 5. And really, you could multiply that by the 3 there, because you've still got the same variation on when the months begin. So, but let's just simplify it and say 5, okay? Then you get into the different versions of the Enoch calendar. There's at least 2. There's probably more. Okay, so, I mean, we're if we keep going, we're getting on 10 different variations of the calendar here that are being done. And the part that breaks my heart is that when I first moved here, we were all keeping the feast together, maybe a day apart. And now it's like pulling hen's teeth to get 2 or 3 families together for Sukkot, because everybody's on a different calendar. Guys, I don't think this is of Yahweh. Yahweh wants his people to keep the feast together at his appointed times. To me, this is the work of an adversary. This is the work of someone who is trying to divide the remnant. That's the only logical conclusion I can come to. And I haven't even talked about lunar Sabbath. Lunar Sabbath, I have friends that keep the lunar Sabbath. It doesn't make any sense either. Lunar Sabbath says that the Sabbath, which is the 7th day, you're supposed to work 6 days, rest the 7th, right? That's in your 10 Commandments, by the way. So, lunar Sabbath teaches that when the new moon happens, that starts your month. Okay, which the Bible also seems to teach, but I'll get into that here in a minute. That starts your month. It also starts your week. So from new moon, you count 7 days, there's a Sabbath. You count another 7 days, there's a Sabbath. Another 7 days, there's a Sabbath, so 21 days. But we have a problem. A lunar month averages 29 and a half days. That's not divisible by 7. So your last week of the month is longer than 7 days. You go longer than 7 days without resting. To me, that doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make any sense that Yahweh himself kept the very first Sabbath in the book of Genesis. On the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Okay. Was it the 7th day after the moon was invented? No. It was the 7th day from day 1. There was no moon. There was no sun. So how can lunar Sabbath make any sense? Yahweh wasn't keeping a lunar Sabbath the first time he kept the Sabbath. It wouldn't have been 7 days. It would have been like 3. Days 1, 2, and 3, before the sun and moon come along, there was evening and morning. Day 1, day 2, day 3. How do you have evening and morning without a sun and a moon? I have no clue. Honestly, there was light. Let there be light. Day 1, no sun or moon. I don't understand how that works. I'm not going to pretend to, but it doesn't make sense with a lunar Sabbath. Lunar Sabbath also breaks down at Pentecost, Shavuot. Our Bibles plainly say, after the wave sheaf offering, you count 7 sevens, 49 days, and then on the 50th day, that's when you bring the Omer. This is the counting of the Omer, okay? And plainly says it. Plainly says the same thing in the Hebrew and the Greek. That doesn't work with a lunar Sabbath because you can't go 7 consecutive sevens, which you would have to get 49, because lunar Sabbaths add extra days at the end of every month. The math doesn't work. You can't go 49 plus 1 and keep lunar Sabbath. So the only way that they can get around that is they do the 7 sevens, the 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks, 49 days, and then they add 50 days to that. And then they do Pentecost. But that's not what it says. I've read over it and over it and over it because people have put up papers saying that that's plainly in the... It's not. It's not. The lunar Sabbath makes no sense. It doesn't. It has the same positive attributes of the Enoch calendar in the sense that every month, where there are holy days, they line up symmetrically. They're on the same days of the week every year. Or every month, I should say. It's every year on the Enoch calendar. It can fluctuate. And if you're going to keep a lunar Sabbath, I've never known anyone, because the lunar Sabbath means that the Sabbath is on a different day of the week every month relative to the Gregorian calendar. I've never known anyone who kept the lunar Sabbath who wasn't self-employed or worked for someone who was self-employed who kept the lunar Sabbath. Why? It's hard enough. It's hard enough to get employers to realize I need Saturdays off, period. I need to be home by sunset on Friday nights, period. It's hard enough to get that through their heads. But then you want to change that every month? It's virtually impossible. Now, some people will say, well, how badly do you want it? It just separates the remnant down even more, makes you even more separate, set apart, therefore holy in some respects. It's hard to argue with that logic. But at the same time, it's like at some point, it gets to where it's a burden for most people. You know, in this world that we live in, this crazy mixed up world, that's extremely difficult for people to do unless they own their own businesses and can set their own hours. I can't do that. The only way I could possibly do that is if I took out a massive loan, bought my own rig, and became an owner-operator. At 40 years old, that ain't happening. I don't have time to pay that off before I want to retire. That's out of the question. What are my options? You know? So my point with all this is that every year, seemingly, we get a new calendar. Somebody comes up with a new variation on the calendar and says, this is the one, guys. I have it figured out. This is the true calendar. Almost every single year at this point. So I want to take a minute and I want to discuss what we know 100% for sure. Because I've said several times in this video, none of these calendars can be backed up 100% from Scripture. None of them can. No one can point to Scriptures that point blank say, do it this way, period. No one can. That's why we have so many different calendars. That's why there's so much debate and dispute. That's why fellowships are splitting up, because everybody's on a new calendar and we can't get together anymore. What do we know for a fact from the Bible? And when I say the Bible, I'm talking the canonized 66 books, okay, to keep it simple. What do we know from that? When you do a search, and this is easy to do with our modern technology, I use Blue Letter Bible. You can do a search for cardinal numbers, first, second, third, fourth, etc., etc. Okay? So I did this to look for what is the highest day of a month ever mentioned in the Bible. So like 12th day of the month, Passover is the 14th day of the month, Day of Atonement's the 10th day of the month, things like this. You can find all the way up to the 28th. You can't find anything mentioned on the 29th or the 30th day or the 31st day for the Enoch people of any month. Nothing is ever recorded in our Bibles of happening on those days. What does that tell us? It tells us that the months have to be at least 28 days long, but it doesn't put a cap on it. It doesn't say what the maximum is. Never, anywhere. There are spots where it's implied, but it never says it. What else do we know? How many months are in a year? It never mentions a 13th month anywhere. It's implied maybe in the book of Ezekiel, but it's not spelled out. And the intercalation method is never mentioned. We know from Revelation, where it talks about the tree of life in the New Jerusalem, it says that it has 12 crops, 12 different types of fruit, one for every month of the year. Well, that seems to be pretty conclusive that there are 12 months in a year. Doesn't say how long they are. 12 months in a year, minimum 28 days. That's really all we know. Now, here's something else. When we go back to Exodus chapter 12, okay? Keep in mind, Exodus chapter 12, Moses has up to this point pretty much spent his whole life in Pharaoh's court. He wasn't out living with the Hebrews. What does that tell us? The calendar that he functioned on for his whole life would have been the Egyptian calendar. So in Exodus chapter 12, when Yahweh comes to him and he says, let me just read it. Let's go to Exodus chapter 12. I'll read it. Think about this logically. Now Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron. Aaron would have been living with the Hebrews his entire life. Presumably, whatever calendar they were keeping, he would have been aware of. And living in Egypt, he would have also known the Egyptian calendar. He would have been in the same general spot that I am in. He's trying to run two calendars at the same time. The calendar that's in use by the world around him that he's a part of just by default. In his case, Egypt. In my case, America. And he may be trying to run a sacred calendar. Maybe he's trying to run a Hebrew calendar for whatever reason. We don't know, because they weren't keeping the feasts. They weren't keeping any of Yahweh's holy days in Egypt. So they weren't keeping the Sabbath. So practically, why would they need to have that calendar at this point? So Aaron may not have even known the biblical calendar. He might have been just like Moses, and all he knew was the Egyptian calendar. So Yahweh came to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. Verse 2, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they are each to take one lamb for themselves according to their fathers' households, a lamb for each household. So, we're going to think logically about this. Knowing that Moses only knew the Egyptian calendar. Aaron knew the Egyptian calendar. He may or may not have known Yahweh's calendar. We don't know. But they both knew the Egyptian calendar. They both functioned on it day to day. Did Yahweh have to define to them what a month was? Here's when the month starts. You look up there, see that moon? That's when the month starts. The Egyptians didn't keep a calendar like that. Now, for a while, and there's debate on this among the scholars, for a while they kept a straight lunar calendar for the priests, just like the Muslims do. 12 months of lunar months, and they did not add a 13th month. They let it drift like the Muslims do. But at the time of the Exodus, which I believe Dave Roll's evidence that it was during the Middle Kingdom, not the New Kingdom. And we know at that time, the prevailing calendar was a 360-day calendar plus 5. And the way they did it was they had 3 seasons, all based on the agricultural cycle of Egypt, which revolved around the flooding of the Nile every summer. Each season had 120 days, and those were divided into months of 30 days. So 12 times 30 is 360. At the end of the year, they would tack on 5 days, and they were the birthdays of the 5 main gods. Okay? Now, they started the year. Again, there's debate on this. We don't know 100% for sure. Most scholars believe that they started the year around what we would call July 20th. At the time, this was when an event called a heliacal rising happened for the star Sirius. The Sirius was very important to the ancient Egyptians. A heliacal rising, it comes from the word helios, which is Greek for sun. A heliacal rising is when a star or a planet goes away for a while. This happens. Like in the summer, we don't see Orion, do we? No, we don't. In the summer, we don't see the Northern Cross. We don't see Aquila the Eagle. There are certain constellations we don't see. And so what a heliacal rising is when you have those few weeks or months whenever a star is gone. You can't see it. A heliacal rising is in the morning. It rises and is visible just before the sun comes up, and then it goes away because it's blinded by the sun. There's too much glare. That's a heliacal rising. That is basically when they started their year. And there were variations on that depending on the dynasty and different things like this. But generally, most scholars think that's how it was done. So from that day, they would count 360 days, all 30-day months, and then they would add 5. Okay? So, this begs the question. This month shall be the beginning of months to you. Moses is not told what a month is. He's not told when the month starts. He's not told how to reckon it. If we go by what we have in our Bibles that we have access to, it's implied and assumed that he already knew what a month was. So that begs the question, should we be looking more at the Egyptian calendar for our timekeeping? I'm going to say possibly yes. And people will freak out, but they're pagans. Time is time. Okay? Just because a group of people reckon time a certain way doesn't automatically mean that reckoning of time is pagan. It's not. So anyway, so the next thing is, it'll be the first month of the year to you. Does Yahweh define a year to Moses? Does he have to educate him and say, okay, Moses, here's when the year starts, which he's doing here, but here's how long it is, here's how you reckon? No. All he's doing here with Moses is saying, basically, Moses, you know what a year is. You know what a month is. Prior to this, that you had a certain way of calculating a year in months. We're going to back up the beginning of the year to this month, which would have been in the spring, not in the summer. So he's backing up the year 3 or 4 months to the spring. There's nothing in the text that says the definition of a year is changing. There's nothing in the text that says that the definition of a month is changing, just when the year starts relative to what they had known prior. Let's be real. That's the only thing we can deduce from this text without reading into it. That's it. That's it. With a month, our Bibles always translate new moon. And that's how we, reckon the beginning of the biblical months. We call it the new moon, the first day of that month. And like I said earlier, there's at least 3 different ways to reckon it. 2 versions of a sighted moon, conjunction. There's probably others that people have cooked up over the years. Moon in Hebrew is the word Yerek. It's the root word for Jericho, city of the moon. Interestingly enough, when you look in the Hebrew and it says new moon, It doesn't say Rosh Yerek. Rosh means new. You've heard of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which actually starts in the 7th month of the year, according to the Bible, which makes no sense. But it doesn't say Rosh Yerek. It says Rosh Kadesh, which that word Kadesh, depending on who you talk to, again, there's different variations, has some idea of renewal or rebuilding. And people will tie this to the moon. They'll say, well, it's the first sliver of the moon because that's when the moon is being rebuilt or renewed. In some contexts, the root word for Kadesh has the visual of like a shiny sword. And so people will say, oh, well, see, that first sliver of the new moon looks like a sword. Which, you can go there. But what are we doing when we do that? We're making assumptions. The phrase Rosh Kodesh doesn't tell us what is being rebuilt. It doesn't tell us what is being renewed. We're assuming it's the moon, but it doesn't say that. It would have been much more simple to say Rosh Yerek. There would have been no dispute. But that's not the term that's ever used. It's the beginning of the renewal, the beginning of the rebuilding. What is being rebuilt? It doesn't say. It does not spell it out. Now, if you go by the Enoch calendar, you can say, well, yeah, because we don't use the moon for months. So new moon doesn't need a moon. It's the beginning of the renewal. We're renewing the monthly count. We're renewing the count of 30. We're starting over. That makes sense, right? I mean, the point with this is hopefully you've seen by now, and if you're a Christian who hasn't ever delved into this, you're getting a big education here. It's a lot of information, and it can be weighty and it can be cumbersome. And if you're someone who has been looking at keeping Yahweh's holy days, you're probably shocked right now. Like, oh, this is what's going on? Wow. I'm sorry for that. I am genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, sorry for that. It grieves me. It shouldn't be this difficult. And I don't know where the information went. I don't know why it's not in our Bibles. Our Bibles don't spell it out. I don't know. Now, the people that prescribe to Enoch and Jubilees will say, well, Jubilees specifically said that when people stopped keeping Yahweh's commandments, they were going to lose track of his calendar. Well, it's hard to argue with that. We have no idea what his calendar is now. Completely lost it. Completely lost it. So I'm going to conclude with two things. First is, if you're keeping Yahweh's holy days on any of these calendars, I'm not upset with you. I have no animosity towards you because I don't know which one is right. I think they are all wrong, actually, because like I said, none of them can be shown to be 100% bulletproof. Not a one. They're all containing something that doesn't add up. Every single one of these calendars has that flaw, and it's a different flaw for each calendar. None of them add up 100%. None of them work 100% based only what is in the text and nothing more. With all these calendars, we have even the Enoch and Jubilees, we have to make assumptions. We have to make subjective judgment calls, arbitrary decisions on how we implement these calendars. And so every time a new calendar is discovered, what do we have? We have more division within the people who are trying to keep Yahweh's commandments. Who would do that? Who would do that? Our Bible specifically prophesies. Let me read you something. Let me read Deuteronomy 30. Okay? Did you know that the devil can read the Bible? He probably knows it better than we do. Like I'm just, spitballing there. Deuteronomy 30. He knows this is in our Bible. So it shall be when all these things that come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind in all the nations where Yahweh your God has banished you, which is exactly where we're at today. Yahweh scattered Israel, and they have never been brought back to the land. Never. We're still scattered. And you return to Yahweh your God, your Elohim, and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons. He's talking about his holy commandments. We have not seen this ingathering fulfilled yet. Then Yahweh your Elohim, verse 3, will restore you from captivity. In other words, these nations that we are captive, we are held here against our will. We can't help it that we were born in America. Yes, it's a blessing in a lot of ways. But America wasn't promised to the descendants of Abraham, was it? Yahweh your Elohim will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you, and will gather you again from all the peoples where Yahweh your God has scattered you. Has not happened yet. This is the gospel that I preach. I preach the Galatians 3 gospel. That the good news that was preached to Abraham, that Paul was talking about, was that he would have not only his descendants, but himself would inherit the promised land forever. And the good news of the gospel is that the Son of Yahweh, Yahshua the Messiah, made a way for that to happen. Our individual salvation is a part of that, but it's bigger than that. It's corporate salvation for a nation, a people, those who are grafted into the Romans 11 tree, the Israel of Yahweh, the Israel of God. The prophets testify to it. Yahshua testified to it. It's all through our Bibles. Now, we have people, I'm one of them, who are heeding this call to return to his commandments. We know what this is going to bring about. He says specifically that when you return to Yahweh your Elohim and obey him with all your heart and soul according to all that I command you today, you and your sons, 2 generations is all we need. That's it. 2 generations. My family, this is what we feel every day. We wake up with this call on our hearts to obey our Maker. I teach my children this. People I know teach their children this. The devil knows this is in our Bibles. You think he's going to try to stop this? Yeah. How's he going to do that? How's he going to do that? By sowing division. Hath Elohim said? Did God really say that? That's what he does. We have this opportunity for the people of Yahweh, and by that, I mean people who have chosen to covenant with him and keep his commandments. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father. Right here, it tells us the will of the Father. You think he wants to stifle that? You think he wants to ruin that? How's he going to do that? By splitting us up. Every year, a new calendar comes out. Wow, I figured out the calendar. Oh, and by the way, you can buy it for $29.99. It ought not to be so. The people of Yahweh should be keeping the feast every single year in the same place at the same time. And we can't because of this. Guys, I'm so sick of it. I'm so tired of it. My soul just grieves. My instinct is to say, hey, let's call a calendar convention. Let's get the elders of the people together and let's have a conference. You know, like how the Catholics used to do when they would get together and have these synods and stuff and figure stuff out. Let's figure out how we're going to do this so we're all on the same page. But I know that that'll never happen because you're going to get 100 elders in a room and they're all going to come with their calendars and their ego and their pride and say, well, I'm the one that's right. You better come to me. We're going to be united my way. And they're all going to be like that. That's how it is now. This is where we're at, guys. It's dumb. It's stupid. It just is. How many new calendars are going to come along before we finally figure out this is folly? I don't even look. All I can say for sure is that, like I said earlier, none of these calendars can be borne out 100% by what's in the text. None. So for me and my family, any of these calendars that I choose to keep, it's strictly an arbitrary decision. I have nothing to back it up other than to say, well, this is maybe the least wrong. That's great, right? That's great. It just burdens me, guys. I can't stand it. I cannot stand it. The burden of this exile is a reproach to me. It breaks my heart. The only solution that I can see to this is when we get in our Bibles, when we get into end times prophecy, we have these day counts that are mentioned in Daniel and they're mentioned in Revelation. I think that Yahweh gave us those day counts for a reason. He put limits on those events time-wise for a reason. And in Daniel, he starts one of the counts based on the abomination of desolation, which cannot be what happened under Antiochus Epiphanes, because the Messiah himself said that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, which is after Antiochus Epiphanes, so he's talking a future event. The fall of Jerusalem under Titus doesn't meet the criteria. Sorry, preterists. The only thing that I can think of is that when that event happens, and hopefully we can recognize it, and we start to see things happen, they will happen according to these specific day counts. In Revelation, I taught on this this past Sabbath. I was teaching the second Exodus from the New Testament, and most of it came from Revelation 11 through 13. You've got 3 time periods. You've got 42 months, 1,260 days, and a time times and half a times. If that was all supposed to equal 1,260 days like we're taught by dispensationalism, why not just say 1,260 days and make it easy for us sheep? But he didn't. He gives us 3 specific periods of time, and if we read Revelation chiastically the way it's intended, which is, if you think of a menorah, for my Christian friends and family, you may not be familiar with what that looks like, so I'll explain it. It's the 7-branched lampstand that would have been found in the tabernacle and temple. It has a stick that goes straight up, and then it has 2 that come off the sides, and then 2 more, and then 2 more, for a total of 7. So you have 3 on each side flanking the middle. When you read chiastically, you read those outer candlesticks first. Then you read the next 2. Then you read the next 2, and it leads you to that center one. Revelation 11, 12, and 13 are those middles. 12 specifically is the dead center, if we read it chiastically, the way it's written. You can line up those 42-month periods. You can line up the 1,260-day periods, and it looks just like the first Exodus. It does. My thinking is that if we can identify the abomination of desolation, if we can identify the events that start each of those cycles of time, if we can say, here's when the 42 months start, here's how I know for sure. And then I go from there and I say, oh, here's the next event. Here's the 1,260 days. When we start to be able to do that, now we're cooking. Now we can figure out what kind of time we're looking at here. Because what do we have there? We have months. We have days and we have times. It doesn't say years. When you look at times, and half times in Daniel and in Revelation, it never uses the word for years. It uses the word for just generic times. It can mean anything. I think that's going to be the key. I think that's going to be the key. So obviously we're not there yet. What I would like to see is the leaders get over your pride and your ego, and let's figure out how can we get back to doing the feast together again. And I realize that this is mostly going to impact the people that I know personally in my sphere of my extended family here in Pennsylvania. I get that. And I don't want this to be taken as anger or vitriol or judgment on anybody who's keeping any of these calendars, because that would have to come back to me, because I've been keeping these calendars too, right? I'm angry at the situation, furious at the situation. We've been put in a spot that has us separated when we should be united. And so I would like to see, larger regional groups, and everybody watching this, regardless of where you're at in the country, you have a regional area of people who also keep Yahweh's holy days. I would like to see, those areas get on the same page again. Like, if it for me personally, if it means going to the Jewish calendar, the Hillel 2 calendar, even though I don't think it's 100% accurate, none of the rest of them are, just pick one, right? Either way, if we can all get back on the same page, where we can get back to having 10, 12, 20 families at the feast again, like it's intended, I think we need to do that. But the question is, are the congregational leaders, are the leaders of households going to be willing to lay aside their pride and their egos to come to some kind of a consensus? And the only way I can see that happening is if people can admit that their preferred calendar system is not bulletproof. It has flaws. It does not work 100% without adding information to it that's not found in the inspired text. If we can all accept that, then maybe we can make it work. But if we're going to be dogmatic and hold to, well, yeah, my calendar, I've had it figured out. There's a group, I won't name them. There's a group, an actual congregation, that actually, I asked them on Facebook, because they strongly implied that if you didn't keep the feasts on the same day that they did, you didn't have salvation. They said, yeah, you don't have salvation. If you're even a day off from when we're keeping the feast, sorry, bud. Like, really? Really? That's where we're at. That's where we're at. I'll leave it at that, guys. I know that there are going to be people out there that watch this that are going to obviously disagree with me. Hopefully, you'll at least be open-minded. I say all the time, question your beliefs. Examine, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you believe your specific calendar is the right one? Can you prove it 100% from this without adding information into it and making assumptions? Can you? I would say no. Maybe you can. Maybe there's something that I don't see. Maybe you're more intelligent than I am. I don't know. But I suspect that a lot of people that watch this are just going to tune this out as, oh, this guy, he's fine, he's lost it. Or some people are probably going to reach out to me and try to say, but James, let me prove to you that this calendar is right. That's the problem. That's the problem. Anyway, I love you guys. These are always with love. I'm very worked up about this because, like I said, it grieves me. I'm trying in this video to be as calm and collected as I can. I know I probably failed in some regard because I do get pretty passionate about some things sometimes. But guys, this is big. Like if we can't even come together on Yahweh's holy days, what kind of a witness to the nations are we? Those are the people of Yahweh? What a bunch of wackos. Really, that's what we look like right now. We can't even agree on the weekly Sabbath. There was a time when everybody I knew kept the Sabbath every 7 days. But now with lunar Sabbath in the mix, you can't even guarantee that anymore. I just, it grieves me, guys. Anyway, good night, guys. I love y'all. I hope you guys have a rest of the week. I just said y'all, so for those not from the South, I love you guys, or I love yins. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of the week. As always, Yahweh bless.